Okay, last video. So in this video, we'll talk about who can draw congressional districts. So we've largely talked about legislative drawn districts, but there are some different methods. So remember, we're on a 10-year cycle. So every 10 years, we have the census where we count up the population, and then we divide the districts between the states using our formula. So once that's done, each state has to draw the districts both at the state legislative level and also at the congressional level for the House of Representatives. Okay, so most redistricting is done by legislatures. So sometimes you have the partisan plans with unified government. You might have the incumbent protection plans with divided government. That's the way most districting is done. But there are some other methods. There's commissions, and largely there's two kinds of commissions. One is an independent redistricting commission. And for a district to be independent, it means it has to be independent from the legislature and the governor. So lots of times the independence has to do with how the members are selected who are going to draw the districts. Sometimes there's a bit of an application in a lottery. There's other rules about you can't not have previously held elective office, and then you can't run for elective office afterwards. So there's an attempt to pull people away from the political process. Now you can have truly, completely, 100% independent. It's not going to happen, right? It's because people have their own political views, but you can try to distance people as much as possible. And another thing I think an independent commission has to have is the legislature does not get to vote on the plan. So the plan is drawn by the commission, and then that's the one you end up with. You have other commissions that are not independent, and usually the distinction here is either the legislature gets to vote on the outcome, Iowa does it like that, or the different parties appoint people from the legislature to be on the commission. So you can see how those really aren't very independent from the political process. Might be outside the legislature a little bit, but there's still pretty strong connection. And sometimes courts are involved. So if the legislature can't come up with a plan, or sometimes the commission can't come up with a plan, then usually courts are a backup. Or if plans are drawn and they're deemed illegal, someone sues and the courts say they're illegal, sometimes the courts will either impose a map or they'll send it back to the body and say, try again, but make sure you do it within the legal bounds. So courts are sort of a backup. A couple states have like a backup commission, but they usually don't end up using those. So our constraints are equal population within the state. So state districts and congressional districts within a state have to be the same size. And then the districts need to be contiguous. So you can't have part of the district over here and part of it over here. And then sometimes we have a wish list. So we might want competitive districts. So right, that means either party has a chance of winning. Lots of 350, 400 districts each year might not be competitive. That means it'd be really hard for one party or the other to win, and one party has a really high chance of winning that. Sometimes we say we don't want funny shapes. So you remember the was it Goofy kicking Donald Duck or something? You don't want these funny shapes. Maybe districts are nice if they're square or round or something. Now it depends a little bit on the state. Go back to Maryland. Maryland has all those coastlines, so it's kind of hard to draw square districts or round districts there. And then some people want to keep cities and towns intact, or communities of interest. We want to think about the term we used earlier. These three here are more of a wish list, but not a legal requirement. Now, some states might write these into the legal requirements, but you have to have the equal population and contiguous districts. These other things are sort of things that maybe would be nice to have. So I'm just going to flip through some maps to show how different states draw the lines. So this first map, this shows state legislatures draw the districts. So we have the stripes in here. They draw both the congressional districts and the state legislative districts. So you can see, just looking at the different states, this is the most common method where the states draw the maps through the legislature. That doesn't mean they might not draw a map and then the courts deem it illegal, right? So that happened in Pennsylvania, leading up to after the 2016 election. But sort of the states here have the first crack at it. The legislature would have the first crack at it. And again, this sort of by looking at this, you can see like, well, it looks like most of the districts are drawn that way. We could add it up, and I think it still end up being that way. Because remember, geography, the physical size of geography doesn't necessarily mean there's more districts. We can have these advisory commissions. And I talked about these a little bit earlier. So this means there's some body that draws the map, but frequently the legislature then gets a crack at it. So I'll give an example. In Iowa, there's a commission. They draw districts. Now I sort of like this method. They draw the districts, and the only data they have are population and county lines. So they just draw the number of districts that they need, trying to keep counties intact and keep population equal. And actually what happens frequently with this method is you end up drawing two incumbents in together. So we have two incumbents that might have to run against each other. However, when they're done with the map, the legislature gets to vote on it. Now in Iowa, sort of the voters hope that the legislature approves the map, but they don't have to. Utah has a similar method, but they haven't tried it yet. So they actually call it an independent redistricting commission, but is not, because the legislature gets a crack at it. So that means they get to vote on it. And if they get to vote on it, in some cases they can amend it. So if they can amend it, they can just substitute their own map. Now I think in Utah, if they don't approve the commission map, they have to like say why, but I don't know, you can sort of just make up a reason for that. Now these are the few states that have true independent redistricting commissions. So California has one. It's a very convoluted process to sort of keep it out of the political process, where people apply from different areas, and then there's I think there's a bit of a lottery to decide who gets to actually serve on the commission. Arizona has the commission. So generally, when independent redistricting commissions draw the boundaries, and this is where some of my research comes into play, we see more competitive races, but actually only in the election following the redistricting. There might be, so that we have more competition in the election following the redistricting that goes down by a little bit in the next one, so 4 years out. But after that, we kind of return back to the normal way of things, where if you're an incumbent, even in these sort of independent redistricting states, once we get further away from drawing the lines, you're pretty safe, just like most incumbents are. So some of these states are pretty new. So the Michigan is new, so we don't really know what the outcomes are. We also actually sort of looking at these states again, some other outcomes are we have less, I don't want to say less gerrymandering, but districts are more compact when independent commissions draw the districts, and they're less likely to split these communities of interest. And so these are some of the things that were on our wish list. So if those are the things you want, then independent commissions are probably the better method to pick. Now, if you want to maintain the status quo, you want to make sure incumbents are safe, maybe you want the politics to be more involved, and maybe you want the legislature to draw them out. So whatever outcome you want to pick the right method. And then we have these sort of political appointee commissions. New Jersey has an interesting one where half the people are Democrats on the commission, half are Republicans, and for a while they actually were picking a political scientist to be the tie-breaking vote. So I think Larry Bartels, and if you read any of his work in this class, was the tiebreaker. But still, there was, politics were certainly involved in that. This is not a very common method, but we have it in a few states. So just to sort of summarize here, this is then the 2016 election, because I have the numbers for this. The Republicans had the advantage. So we think about who was able to draw the seats. Approximately 40% of the seats were drawn by Republicans. They had total control. Only 10% by Democrats, and then the half of them were either divided, courts, or commissions. You can sort of look at the numbers here, but they tended to favor the Republicans. However, partisan tides shift a lot. So think about the 2018 election. Even though Republicans were able to draw a lot of the seats, they still lost control of the chamber in 2018. So if partisan tides shift enough, it can sort of overcome any redistricting, but they need to shift a lot. So you want to control the process, you're more likely to get the outcome you want, but nothing is guaranteed in politics. I think the 2016 election is another example of that. So I'll just leave you with this last map. So this is thinking about the 2020 congressional redistricting and who controls the process. So in the South, we see it's a lot of Republican control, but we have some divided or neutral. Democrats control in a handful of places, but not too many. So, sort of this is going to be important in drawing the next round of districts, and we'll, obviously we need the census to happen. So we'll see where things go. All right, there's redistricting.